Thank you. I am Mark Schlenker. I serve as the Honorary Consul for Germany for the state of Iowa, and I've done that since 1994. In my real life, what pays the bills is I was appointed as a judge a few years ago here in Iowa. I'm down in Indianola. I was appointed by the President of Germany back in '94 as Honorary Consul. That's a post that has to be accepted by the State Department, and it is a formal diplomatic post, but it's a little bit like a title at what it used to be working at a bank. They give you a nice title and no pay. But it's an honorary post, but it is a formal diplomatic post, and it's my role to promote education and cultural understanding between Iowa and Germany. And coming from something of an agricultural background myself, ag issues are a priority with me. My dad grew up on a farm, and I grew up on a small farm operation north of Indianola. My dad had a town job and had a small cow-calf operation. So agriculture is near and dear to me. My first job was $1 an hour baling hay, and I remember that fondly because I worked 5 hours in 100-degree heat and no, 4.5 hours in 100-degree heat, and the farmer said, "You boys done a good job. I'm going to give you a little extra," and he gave me 50 cents more. I got $5 full for 5 hours of work. For the last 20 years, I've tried to help increase the dialogue between Iowa and Germany by attempting to get top German policymakers here to meet with Iowa farmers and ag leaders. I felt that Iowans need to become more involved in trade policy formation and not just react to it. The Farm Bureau has been a reliable partner in these efforts that I've had, and for several years, Craig Hill in particular has been someone I could count on for help. I don't think Craig even knows it, but one of the persons that came to visit his farm a few years ago ended up not too many years ago as Angela Merkel's chief ag advisor in her chancellery staff. Last fall we had an official delegation here from the German Bundestag, from the Agriculture Committee, and I had great help in setting that visit up and hosting it. I can guarantee that these are the people who are directly involved in ag policy making in Germany. Craig was instrumental in helping make that a success, and I also need to thank certain Iowa office holders, Iowa businesses, and Iowa State University. The support we get from President Leith and the Ag College has just been tremendous. I would be remiss on this day, which means something to certain people in the room, I'm sure. Let me quote another speaker who came to visit here in '79, about 2 miles north of here. "Therefore, conserve the land well so that your children's children and generations after them will inherit an even richer land than was entrusted to you. But also remember what the heart of your vocation is. While it's true here that farming today provides an economic livelihood for the farmer, still it will always be more than an enterprise of profit making. In farming, you cooperate with the Creator for the very sustenance of life on earth." Those are the words of Pope John Paul II, who came here in '79, just north of where we are today. I think we can learn from each other on common problems. I hope this is also the start of further discussions on these issues. I hope by the time you leave today, you feel your time will have been well spent and you've just started discussions which will continue for some days and maybe years to come. Unfortunately, my main occupation as a judge means I have to go back to Indianola for some afternoon hearings. You can contact me in Indianola at any time if I may be of assistance to you in further efforts here for what's discussed. My contact information is on the German Consulate website, German Consulate Chicago. I also represent the French, and you can also see me on the French Consulate website, and you can give me a call on my cell phone. My cell phone is 491-0711. So thank you for your attendance here today. I wish you great success and hope you find this a worthwhile afternoon.
Thank you. Appreciate that. You might be in trouble by giving your number to a bunch of farmers. They do like to talk. So you might be getting a lot of phone calls.
That's
all right. And really, Farm Bureau does a great job. We have been in other countries, and if you get the politics out of the way, it's farmers talking to farmers. We learn from each other. We really have more in common than not. So I appreciate what Iowa Farm Bureau is doing, and I look forward to a good dialogue with German farmers and people. I am now pleased to introduce Ms. Karina Jess, the Senior Manager for Market Entry Programs and Delegations at the German-American Chamber of Commerce of the Midwest. Ms. Jess is currently leading the GACC Midwest Transatlantic Dialogue, which we're being part of today, Agricultural Perspectives Initiative, bringing together representatives of the German and U.S. agricultural sectors for know-how exchange and network building. I understood that they were out on the farm today, so they did get kind of a cold reception, I guess, but I hope they learned a lot and not just shiver. She is also responsible for the German-American Chamber of Commerce Midwest market entry programs related to clean energy and sustainability, and has organized numerous business delegations covering topics such as bioenergy, water and wastewater, wind, and energy efficiency. Prior to this, in 2010, Karina spent 3 years working in marketing and sales at a large German food manufacturer, as well as 1 year at an intellectual property and technology firm in the UK. She holds a bachelor's degree in international business administration from the Berlin School of Economics. It's my pleasure to welcome Miss Jess, Karina Jess.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Mark. I'm delighted to welcome you here today on behalf of the German-American Chamber of Commerce of the Midwest. At the German-American Chamber of Commerce, we're currently organizing a whole series of events related to agriculture in the transatlantic context. They're all part of this Transatlantic Agricultural Dialogue Initiative, which is mainly funded by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy, with the intention of bringing farmers from Germany and the US together for a knowledge exchange and talk about best practices, and then thus ultimately reducing trade barriers. The initiative is also supported by the Consulate Corps and then also various other ministries and institutions in Germany. For example, the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. We're happy to have Astrid Jacobs de Padua here today. On page 2 of the brochure in front of you, you can see all the programs that we have planned as part of this initiative, including several study trips to Germany. And the next study trip will take place this August, and it's on the same topic as today, soil health and nutrient management, and some members of the Iowa Farm Bureau will also join us on that trip. A few words about the German-American Chamber. We are the official representative of German industry and trade here in the Midwest and are headquartered in Chicago. We were founded around 50 years ago and in 1963, and together with our sister offices in New York City, Atlanta, and San Francisco, and a few branch offices, we organize many trade delegations between the US and Germany every year, serving many different industries. We are also a membership organization with around 2,500 member companies, mainly German companies. If you're interested in learning more about our organization and possibly getting involved and as a member or in whatever capacity, please let me know. Our current focus, or one of our current focuses, is this free trade agreement that is currently being negotiated between the US and the EU, the European Union, in short TTIP, or many people also call it TTIP. And what it means for farmers in Germany and the US is also what we want to discuss here today, in addition to our other topic, soil health and nutrient management. The whole reason why is that food and food production continues to be a hot topic. It gains a lot of media attention, and particular in Germany, TTIP has a lot of media attention, and in connection to that, food safety standards keep coming up. This discourse, this public discourse, is often dominated by emotions and perceptions rather than looking at actual facts. So our goal today is to have the people that grow our food have an informed discussion, talk about best practices, see what are the differences, what are the similarities, and what can we learn from each other to bring forward more trade and continue good relationship. 2015 is also the International Year of Soils, which makes our topic of soil health and nutrient management ever more relevant. Let me say a big thank you to the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation for hosting and sponsoring this program. And in particular, a very big thank you to Dave Miller for the excellent cooperation on putting such a great program together. And we've been on a farm this morning, the whole site visit, everything. So thank you very much. In our first panel, we'll hear about the importance of TTIP for Iowa's farmers, as well as what TTIP means from the European perspective. Our first speaker is Craig Hill, you most certainly all know him, president of the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation. Craig's service with the Iowa Farm Bureau started with various positions with the Warren County Farm Bureau Board. He was elected vice president of the Iowa Farm Bureau in 2001 and president in 2011. Please welcome Farm Bureau President Craig Hill.
Thank you, Karina and Mark. By the way, Mark preceded me in Indianola High School, and he captured all the good grades. There was no more good grades when I got through school, so he was awarded all of those, I think, deservedly. He's a judge and probably a busy judge as well, so he needs to depart here pretty soon. But Astrid, we've gotten to meet a few times, and I'm looking forward to your comments. I want to thank the German-American Chamber of the Midwest for all their involvement and help and assistance in preparing this. This is a great endeavor. It's a dialogue. It's a conversation that I hope you all can engage in here soon. The goal here today is to just that, have that dialogue and to promote, expand, and assist in the expansion of trade. Find ways to be an enabler to trade and economic growth, because it benefits both the U.S. and the 28 member states of the EU. Work through the problems one by one. There's barriers, there's resistance, but in a mode of cooperation, we need to find a pathway to discovery of how we can agree to this major bilateral agreement. $1 trillion, in fact, beyond $1 trillion of goods are traded each year between the EU and the U.S. Germany, I believe, is a #1 exporter. Is that correct? From the EU, you're either #1 or #2 of all those member states. Generally speaking, both the EU and the U.S. have advanced economies, have generally high incomes of the citizens. The economies are very well integrated. There's not many economic barriers. Both are members of the WTO, and we have a strong foundation of rule of law. Very similar and consistent, and in the WTO activities there's a method of resolution when we do have disputes. Market access is important. Regional cooperation as well, and to harmonize the rules so we can all trade freely. Some say there will be a 50% boost in trading activity between the EU and the U.S. if approved, TTIP, or Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Some say that it is the biggest trade deal in the history of the world. Negotiations were launched about 2 years ago in February 13th of 2013, and they're very slow. I think we're in the 8th round of negotiations. A lot of posturing takes place. In fact, TTIP, as I mentioned, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, has actually been referred to as time for tedious and infinite posturing. Now, here in the U.S., the AFL-CIO would be opposed to the negotiations in many ways. They would like to bring a lot of the labor standards from Europe and have those adopted here in the U.S. They also would like to retain the Jones Act, a maritime act that was created, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago, 40 or 50 years. Dave? Oh, before that, 1910. It's a protectionist maritime law that needs to be protected in the eyes of AFL-CIO. And the Buy American programs also they would like to protect Even some leaders of foreign nations have protested this arrangement, including Putin. He would rather sell his crude oil to Europe than we sell ours. Most of the protest, though, actually comes from across the pond in the EU. TTIP equates to a lowering of standards as perceived by residents in the EU. Some would say that the U.S. lacks food safety. We have processed food that contains 70 to 80% genetically engineered or GMO products. In the EU, they're opposed to mass farming technology, as they would describe it. Hormones that are linked to cancer are stuffed in our meat. So unhealthy is our chicken that carcasses are washed in bleach. They would say that the U.S. has lax restrictions on pesticides. One example given is the EU bans 1,200 chemicals in cosmetics, 1,200 harmful cosmetics in cosmetics, and the U.S. bans only 12. So there's a mixture of opposition, but there is much to do specific to agriculture. And if I could show that video, Aaron.
On both sides of the Atlantic, under the EU-US trade agreement, TTIP, there is a plan to harmonise rules for how products are made and sold. It's called regulatory coherence. Now, that may sound like the most boring, abstract technical term you've ever heard, but it will have very real consequences on our lives. Consequences that could be amazing, but that will actually be terrible, unless you're a big corporation. But first, let's see what kind of rules exist on both sides. Take the way the animals we eat are treated, for instance. In the US, the focus is on the end product. As long as what ends up on your plate doesn't kill you, it doesn't matter how it got there. In the EU, the focus is more on the animal's welfare and quality of life, until it ends up on your plate. Now take medical devices like hip implants. The US has much stricter rules than the EU. By raising EU standards up to the US ones, we could have the best prosthetics. So as we can see, people in the EU and the US could gain a lot from sharing their best standards. But here's the trick. So far, the agreement has not been written for people, but for big corporations. They're the ones setting the agenda. They want to make more profit by lowering the costly standards and regulations here and in the US. With this logic, no matter what side of the Atlantic you're on, you get screwed equally. We don't want our standards lowered under TTIP. Don't let corporations force a race to the bottom. Help us raise our standards of living. Give multinational corporations a generous finger by sharing this video.
Now, I apologize for some of that, but it's the reality in Europe. Eating is political. Every single decision I make about what to buy is determined by how the animals are kept and or what grows in our fields. And I can make sure that I support the farmers and not the big ag industry or corporations. So that's a feeling, a sentiment. EU thinks they will lose jobs with an agreement. They believe corporations will take control. And they think the negotiations are held under a cloak of secrecy and darkness. This is a parade in Germany. This was on January 17th. Astrid, I don't know if you're familiar. I think 50,000 people were assembled in this demonstration opposed to TTIP. Another gentleman, a demonstrator, some humor here, but very serious. Farmers are involved. Farmers equally are protesting the arrangement, not just consumers. Monsanto is an evil name. And by the way, just as an aside, Monsanto is considered this giant, big corporation that's so evil when Whole Foods actually is the same size as far as revenues. So there's a lot of perceptions in Europe, but it's a mixture of opposition. And we hope that we can work through this. We hope we can have a dialogue and find that pathway to agreement. Exports of U.S. ag have been going up. In 1994, in the U.S., we had $46 million worth of product that left our borders as far as ag exports. In 1994, it was actually the first time we were a net exporter of pork. Today, we're a net exporter of about 27% of our pork production. $144 billion in 2013, $152 billion in 2014. We're growing in exports. we want to continue that. We consider ourselves a least cost producer, a comparative advantage producer, and we hope to be able to capture these opportunities. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Astrid Jacobs de Padua, Minister Counselor for Food and Agriculture at the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Washington, D.C. There she's responsible for the area of food and agriculture, and previously she has held postings in the Food and Agriculture Organization to the United Nations in Rome, as well as at the Embassy in Buenos Aires. She will speak about TTIP and agriculture, and I think also make a comment on these pictures we just saw and what are the general perceptions about TTIP and agriculture. Welcome, Astrid.
Thank you so much for being here to host us. I think that's a very great opportunity to get to know each other much better. You know, I'm in the US now for 5 months. It's already my second time in Iowa. Now, as was mentioned before, there was this delegation from the German Bundestag where I think we had very fruitful discussions. There were also some members of the Green Party with it, so they got really a good impression. And I know that in March there will be a group coming to Washington, D.C. of farmers from the Iowa Farm Bureau. I'm happy to receive you there. And then I hope that a lot more will go to Germany in August and in the coming year to progress. Because as Craig mentioned, I think it's very important to have this kind of dialogue because there are a lot of misunderstandings. It is right that Germany is a very interesting market. I think we are the biggest importer in the second biggest in the world, but the biggest in the EU. We have a very interesting market, especially for specialties, organic foods, but also for all kind of other high-value products. And I think the US to us is becoming more and more important. US is now the second biggest importer, you are the exporter for us, you are the importer after Switzerland. So you even are more important than others, and as an export country, you even are more important than, for example, Russia. As you know, Russia is a difficult market right now. The figures already went down for Germany, especially the beef exporters in 2013. So the really ban last year didn't have that big effect as one could have thought, but it's still very, very hard. Craig, you showed us some pictures about the Green Week. This is always a very important event in Germany. It's a fair where the German public, which are, even though we are more spread out, but the public doesn't really have contact with ag anymore. So this fair is very important because it's not just about presenting food to the public, it's also a marketplace for importers, exporters, so we really would like forward if the US would come over there and be present on this fair. But it is also the possibility where the consumer can see what is ag about. So there are also a lot of booths and shows where you have animals, but also where you have production areas. And I think it would be very important that US is there and shows that the US agriculture is much more diverse than it is in the head. You mentioned that in this protest there were also farmers. That is right. But in Germany, there is a huge discussion going on about what is really ag, what are farmers, what have they to do. So there are also a lot of farmers' organizations now waking up and saying, okay, we also have to do something. For example, on the social media there is a website which is called Frag den Bauern, ask the farmer himself. It's called the egg Wikipedia, so something like that. So farmers starting to stand up and seeing the need that they have to explain what are they doing. And so it became very political, what is the right way to produce, but it's not that all farmers are in this corner. Then some would like to see us. You see, there is a lot of activism going out, but I think the other farmers have to stand up and also defend their case. You talked about the TTIP negotiations. Well, slow is relative. I think the TTIP is one of the most comprehensive agreements. It's much deeper than, for example, TPP. And we know that for the US government right now, TTP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is the first most important. There have been hearings last week in Congress, or also 2 weeks ago, and a lot of congressmen are more or less reluctant. And what is very interesting in all kind of events I'm attending is that people always talk about goods, agriculture, and services. So it's very interesting that even though agriculture is maybe on the overall level what is covered economically in such a free trade agreement, or free trade agreements, because we're talking of various, is very high. It has a really high attention. And I think that is very important because it's so important to people here. So I think it was I can echo what I perceive as concerns from the American side. In these hearings, there was a lot about questioning that the EU would lower the working standards, labor standards in the US. I can assure you that is not the case. And I think what we all are not aiming at is harmonizing standards. I think the way we would like to see things is to get an equivalency. So to show people that there are different kind of approaches to, for example, food safety issues, but that they are all aiming at the same objective, which is safe food. And I think also in Germany, we are getting closer and understanding that the amount of safe food is the same here in the US than over there. Maybe sometimes you're a little bit better doing with Campylobacter, or we're doing better with the Escherichia coli, but they are always we all aim at the same thing, and I think we have to find a way to bring this as a communication or as a result of the agreements. I think it will be very important to do a lot of outreach in Germany. It's extremely important to see that we can show that this famous chlorinated chicken is not something which really impedes these kind of trade. It's about market access, but I think the most important is not necessarily the access. We're talking about liberalizing agriculture as much as possible. But the most important, and these also studies show, is that we get rid of a lot of these non-trade barriers, which are not starting with these difficult issues, but there are also a lot of administrative issues. For example, European exporters find it extremely burdensome to go to all this paperwork. You have a lot of different labelings requirements. For example, there are national requirements which don't meet or match with the federal don't with the different states. So it's very complicated and difficult for exporters also to bring stuff over here. So I think there is a lot what we can do and harmonize, not in bringing together these different ways of labeling. Well, maybe just 2 or 3 things why the ways of production are so different. Germany is very small. The US is 27.5 times Germany, but we have much more inhabitants. There are 82 million, so we have per square kilometer 226. I think in Iowa there are around 20, 30, something like that. So obviously there are a lot of different regulations and needs to bring these different conditions under one understanding. But what we also found out that production here sometimes, or in Germany, is perceived as being industrial. But what we saw today as an example is that there are a lot of small farmers, family farmers, which are fighting with similar problems than in the US. I think the main message I would deliver today is both sides can win with it. I think there's a lot of outreach to be done on both sides, because what I saw as well as reluctance to agreement with Europe is great. I think it is important that there will be much more transparency on it, because it's always difficult to make people believe that they can gain something if they don't know what it is about in detail. Thank you so much.
Okay, let us go now to our panel discussion. I would like to welcome the panel moderator, Phil Sundblad. He's a member of the Iowa Farm Bureau Board of Directors and represents District 3, which comprises 12 counties in northwest Iowa. Phil has served in many leadership positions for the Buena Vista County Farm Bureau, including president, vice president, voting delegate, and treasurer. Thank you very much, Phil, for moderating this panel.
Thank you.
Well, as Mark said, now it's time for audience participation. So I hope that you've had a chance to think about a couple questions maybe you've had to ask to Craig or to Astrid. I'll maybe go off first here. Maybe, Astrid, just to give our group a little better perspective on maybe some of the concerns that people in Germany or the EU might have. You know, as a farmer here in Iowa, who talk about food safety, and for me anyway, that's probably more of a preparation question. Was it cooked thoroughly or properly or handled properly, rather than a GMO type of a question? You know, essentially, I never think of food safety. I guess I'm probably not really concerned about it. Will this food be harmful to me? You know, unless it's a preparation type of a question. But maybe from the EU side, maybe give us just a little bit of better perspective. Is it GMOs or hormones or those types of things? Are they? Is that a consumer type of an issue? Do farmers feel the same way? Government been talking about that? Just give us a little better perspective on why that comes about.
Yeah. I think food safety is one should distinguish two aspects of it. Food safety is closer to the mic. Okay. Food safety is first of all a way to guarantee that every food which comes on the table is safe. And I think there in the conception are already different aspects. And we have a way where we say that all the production has to look, for example, in the animal area, animal welfare, that from the production of the animal till the meat, for example, the whole procedure has to be safe. Here you do this as well, but you don't necessarily look at the whole procedure, you look at the product in the end, which comes out. So this is a different approach to it. I think another way or another difference is that we are much more concerned with risk. So we do a lot of prevention. So we think we should minimize the risk and be very close to zero, that the product might be safe in the end. So I think the GMO is something which I wouldn't really like to discuss as a food safety issue because it became an issue on its own. It's on its own standing. It's becoming something like very political, and I wouldn't like to see it as an example for our different food safety discussions. I think that would lead us nowhere because the discussions were pushed so far. We are now in the EU discussing new legislature about it, which distinguishes between the cultivation of GMOs and the trade of GMOs. So now the national states within the EU become the possibility to decide that there is cultivation of GMOs or none. Trade, we were still waiting for the European Commission to renew and to reform the procedures. And I think what is interesting to the US is to see how these procedures, because you want all this long list of events which is out there to be approved. So, but this is something where we still wait for how the European Commission will be going on with it.
Questions? Somebody's got to have a question out there. Karen, go ahead.
Karen Seipold, Mills County. To ask her to give you a little background, my husband and I farm a row crop operation here in Iowa. We have 4 small children, so not only am I concerned as a farmer and a producer of how we raise our grain, I'm concerned about what I bring into my house to feed my kids. So as much as the Germans want to make sure that the product is good all the way through the process, I believe that we American producers are too. We're very concerned from start to finish. There is a big disconnect, as I'm sure there is in Germany, between the actual producers of the goods and services and the people who make the laws concerning the goods and services. Because as producers, we want to make sure our best practices start from the beginning as well. It's not just about an end product. So whether it's genetically modified or organic, we're very concerned that what we give to the public is as good as anything we would bring into our home, too. So I want to reach out to that as a producer and as a consumer, that's of top interest, I think, to all of us in this room. So it's not, I really, as you said, I don't want to make it a political issue because it isn't. It's so much as we're proud of what we do, we're proud of what we make, and we consume it too. One time when I was in Belgium, I found it interesting that some of their laws got in the way of how they produce their take, for instance, their eggs, their chickens. They had so many laws, rules, and regulations within Belgium that it was very expensive to produce the end product, the chicken, the meat products, and the eggs. And when you went to the grocery store, the eggs that were imported from Czechoslovakia or from Poland were a lot cheaper, but they didn't have the same rules and regulations in production. So they were able to sell them at a lower rate. So people were buying the cheaper product, even though the product from their own country was supposedly better, but they weren't willing to pay the price. Do you have a similar situation in Germany where everybody would love to be able to afford this higher end product, but the income isn't there to be able to afford it? So they're willing to go with a lesser product, perceived as lesser product, in order to make their own budget.
First of all, I appreciate that you say you are proud and you're doing the job as we think we are doing and should do it. I think that is true, and that is why I think it is so important that there is this dialogue and that the US farmers go also out to Europe and explain what they're doing, that they not just leave the field to the activists, to put it this way. On the second point, I think especially you're experiencing something similar with the egg in California, no? Where that is more or less something similar. I think that every product has to be safe, and so even the important products are safe in the sense. But we have more and more questions of the consumers. If the regional products, how they are produced, there's a growing concern with the environmental issues, and therefore it's becoming more and more important also the way how you market things. That is why we have a lot of programs also for regional marketing, local marketing, where the producers explains, and then people are also prepared to pay more. But there are always different groups of incomes, so that is also a reality.
Another question.
Guy Peterson, Jones County. I guess I would be curious how you or your consumers differentiate between a family farm produced product and a corporate farm produced product. Where do you draw that line? I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a large corporation in the United States, Cargill Incorporated, and they raise hogs, millions of them, and they have a system where they have independent producers like myself. I don't do it, but I could if I wanted to. Put up a hog building or two and feed their pigs. The pigs belong to me. I buy them from them. So the pigs were born to a corporate farm, and then they're shipped out to my farm where I'm a small independent producer, and I raise them and market them and so on and so forth. So how do you differentiate between a family farm and a corporate farm? How do you draw that line?
Yeah. I got the question. I have more difficulty in answering, not because of understanding, but because it's really a difficult question. I think everybody is, or there is a growing awareness that not small is always beautiful, that there are conditions on small farms which can be worse than on bigger farms. So it's not about being or saying where is the exact line. I think it's more about explaining the way how you produce, and it's more about educating the consumer. But this is getting more and more difficult because the consumer is getting more and more far or away from the production areas, and that is why it is so important to have places where you can really show how you are producing things. But I think that is a question which can't really be answered. It's about marketing and being not just marketing in the sense of trying to elude, but really to be authentic with what you're marketing.
Chris, go ahead.
Chris Winnie, Osceola County. My question is to you, and maybe Craig, you can help out with this too. I know in the Iowa here, we've had a disconnect between a lot of consumers and the farm. We're getting too many generations removed from the farm. We've made, I'm going to say great strides, but we're starting to make strides in bridging that gap. It sounds to me like that gap is happening for you as well. Is there organizations or groups of people, dairy producers, pork producers, whatever, that are trying to bridge that gap to help out some of this disconnect that you're discussing today with a safe product for our families?
I think there are tries, or I think the farmers start to do this first what they did is, as income is low, farms getting smaller and so on, there's a growing agro-tourism movement. It's already movement, I don't know. But I'm always surprised, especially as families I know with little kids, they say, okay, we don't want to go to Spain or Italy or so somewhere. They're going just to a farm. So this is something which is getting more and more important, to give people the possibility to experience what farming means. And then there is this other movement where they start to say, okay, we as farmers have also to be a player in the social media and to come out. It has been very impressive to me that on Facebook, for example, there's a huge discussion going on. Unfortunately, it's in German, otherwise I could present it to you, but which is very interesting, how they also try to argue, and how many people participate when you see then the figures of people who participate in this kind of thing. But the gap is big, and there you have to try to find formats for events where you can invite people to your farm, for example, which is happening a lot with vegetables. For example, each year asparagus. There's big asparagus parties going on around Berlin where there's asparagus. So these are kind of things to bring people to go out on the farm.
Dean, go ahead.
Dean X. Am I on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Dean Ekstrand from Pocahontas County in northwest Iowa. My wife and I like to say we raise three things in our farm: corn, pigs, and kids. The nature of our farm is small in acreage, but I have a hog unit. I'm one of the guys that has contracted with one of the big evil corporations that has gobs of sows, and I'm a glorified hotel operator. I don't own the pigs. We take care of them until they're marketed. There is a perception, and I'm sensing it's in Germany or the EU as well as in America, that if it's non-GMO, it's organic, it's raised on a small scale, it must be much better. I remember a case in just the last couple of years, a major food poisoning problem in Germany that was chased back to organic vegetables. How do we address that perception that just because it's organic or because I know the face of the guy who raised it, it's not necessarily any better than the product that is raised on a larger scale?
I'm not quite aware of this case you're making reference to, but it's obviously that as the organic market is getting more and more interesting, there is more the temptation of frauds, so enforcement has to become better. But I think people also understood that organic not necessarily is healthier. The other day I had a discussion, is organic food always per se healthier than others? And I think that people start to understand that it is maybe with less contaminant, but that's a different way of production, that it's really getting on this way, that it's a different way of production, where maybe you pay more because you do better in the sense of taking care of environment.
Go ahead.
Will Frazee, Montgomery County. You mentioned Facebook and social media. You know, here in the United States, we deal with misinformation that goes out through those channels on the internet all the time. How big of an issue is that in Germany, and do typically the consumers develop their opinions versus what they read on Facebook and visit with their friends, or do they use government or university research? What helps develop their opinions in Germany?
opinion of the consumer in general.
Yeah, just in general, you know, do they listen more to their Facebook friends or what they read on the internet or university research or government information?
Well, I think they trust basically government because we have a very strong organization, and governments, the authorities sometimes need some time to get things. But in the last cases we did have, they were discovered relatively quickly, and there was quite a good response by government. Obviously, people tend to believe a lot in neighbors, and when someone is doing a warning and so, probably at least you would then try to dig in and to get more information about it. Role of science, it's a little bit awkward that it comes up at this point, but role of science is quite different from here, from the role it plays here. I think scientists I think this is a general cultural thing, so please don't take it too much to safety. If there are scientists who say something is safe, then government says, yeah, that is true, they will believe it. But in general, we tend to question scientific advice much more than it is done here. Because I think people in Europe in general are less technology open. They're just questioning, do I really need something new? Do I need a new invention? You know, it took us so long to accept cell phones and other things.
Alan, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for joining us today and enlightening us on a wonderful topic. Did you or who handed out this piece of paper with?
He's coming next.
Okay,
You're
very
ahead
good.
of time.
Okay, so my question would be is that with the population growth in Germany, by the way, I have been to your country. I have been down the Rhine River and with 3 bottles of wine, and I don't remember very much. With the population growth in the EU and the organic growth of agriculture, is there enough land to produce enough food in an organic way to feed the population?
Okay, I think there are always people who will tell you, yes, there is. But in fact, we are facing, well, German demographics are going down. But anyway, we are losing a lot of arable land every day because there are new settlements. You have to, whenever a settlement or an agricultural area goes to settlement, then it has to be compensated. And then there is a loss of, we did the calculation this morning, I think it was about 70 acres per day or something like that, which is lost. So yes, there's a problem. So this is a little bit the dilemma we face. On the one hand, we think technology is, we don't trust it too much. On the other hand, we're losing arable land. So we will need to intensify probably on some areas. But it's always a question about how much. I think all kinds of agriculture in the end are needed.
Okay. I wrote a paper so I could graduate from a university, and in 1984, we were losing 40 acres a day to expansion and highways and concrete and shopping malls, and you're losing about 78. Is that correct?
No, yeah, 70 acres per day.
Okay. So then my final question would be, what is your number of children per family, is that decreasing? And your longevity of your lifespan is increasing?
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the problems of Germany, actually. That is why, this is on a very personal opinion. This is not the official, but this is why we really need immigration policies.
Okay. Thank you.
Randy Glade, Guthrie County. Just kind of curious, what's the average size of farm?
Average size of farm, I think my colleagues are much better on that.
Oh, what's that in acres? Okay, thank you.
I think we got one more question coming, and then we'll need to change gears, but go ahead.
There was an old cattle rancher in Nebraska that used to say that in his business, margin was constantly moving out of it, and his job was to find a way to put it back in. Would it be fair to say that the American farmer maybe has tried to put that back in through economies of scale, and that maybe the farmer in Germany has tried to put that back in by differentiating their product and capturing a higher price for it?
Did I get it right that you think, or that the question is about you're doing more on scale and we're trying to put more value on products?
Or find a product that they can get a higher price for in the marketplace, I guess is what I'd ask.
Yeah. Well, I think there are different conditions, you know? So there are different costs involved in Germany. So maybe that is what we have to do.
Dave?
Dave Miller, staff. Let me throw out a last question to both Craig and to Astrid. What are the places of commonality in the trade agreement that are probably places that we can start building? You know, we've talked some about our differences, but where are the points of agreement? What are the points that are going to bring us to consensus on the value of a trade agreement? The talk has been that TTIP could be the largest, most impactful trade agreement for U.S. agriculture of all trade agreements. And at some point we need to find commonalities. So, you know, maybe as a last question, where are the commonalities and how do we build on that?
I think there is commonality. That commonality may be difficult to obtain in that, and I'm thinking about today, this morning on the trip to the Capitol, there was a large white truck with a large white steel tank that drove in front of our bus. It was very well manicured, very nice looking truck, but it was labeled Sweet Honey. I happen to know what's inside that tank. It's a septic removal service. But their brand, their label was Sweet Honey. So that's a brand. It has a good feeling, it has a warm fuzzy, but I know what's inside. And science would lead us to believe we should probably not have much to do with the contents of that tank. And I think when you're talking about food safety, we need to understand and relate to the emotional aspects of food and society's desire for those warm feelings and brands, but then base your decisions and your judgments on science. And for example, chlorine. We inject chlorine into our water. The water that we all drink here today has a chlorine product in it. And it's proven to be safe, in fact, more healthy with chlorine than without. Chlorine can be toxic if you ingest too much. But science has given us a tool to achieve food safety and health. And so I guess the bottom line for me is that we have to manage the discussion around science and prudent food safety protocols that are proven and known to exist. And if we do that, then we can come to agreement, because it's more of a mathematical calculation than it is an emotional calculation. But still, we have to acknowledge each of our countries have different cultural aspects of things.
I think I agree. First of all, it's not, I agree with this. But I think further, we both sides have an interest in a healthy and strong agricultural sector. And I think that there are ways where we can find to strengthen the sectors on both sides, and to find ways, especially on the non-trade barrier areas, in the administrative areas, where we really can boost trade between both sides.
Well, thank you. Craig, as I figured, our group would have several questions for our guests, and because they don't have a chance to share with someone like her often, I figured a lot of those questions would go there. Certainly trade is important to us in Iowa. It's important to us as a country. You know, if you look just at our soybean crop that we raise in Iowa, half of that, if you took that crop, if you took half of it, it would go to the aquaculture industry that's out there. You know, that industry did not exist 10 years ago. So certainly, again, trade is important to us in developing those markets out there. And as you look at this particular situation, trading between two countries, it's important to our farmers, obviously here in Iowa in our country. It's obviously important to the farmers there. And I certainly believe that there are a lot of commonalities that we need to continue to build on to get to that point. Certainly the citizen diplomacy efforts that we have done as an Iowa Farm Bureau, where we have people talking to people, farmers talking to farmers. We've had the privilege of hosting a couple of Russian groups, and many of the folks from my district have been to our farm to sit it down across the table from those folks, share things, learn about what they do. It gives us a better understanding, and then I think be able to better develop relationships with those folks, which become good trading platform to work off of. So with that, again, let's give a hand to our two panelists.